Have you ever felt like you were in the wrong place at the right time, or the right place at the wrong time? Well, in today's story, our heroine finds herself in the right place at the right time. But before we dive into that, let me introduce you to the star of our story. Her name is Esther. She's an attractive young Jewish woman living in the ancient city of Shushan. The time is the 5th century BC, a period when Jews were allowed to live in Persia, which is modern-day Iran, under the rule of King Cyrus. Life was good until it wasn't. One day, while Esther was chilling in the palace with her bestie, Queen Vashti, a messenger dude shows up with some major news. King Ahasuerus, the big cheese himself, was throwing a massive 6-day party inviting all the important people in the kingdom, including the royal family and yes, even the royal servants got a fancy invite to this shindig. And guess who's in charge of organizing this huge bash? None other than our girl, Queen Vashti. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. Vashti was decked out in all the finest clothes, looking like $1 million as she made her way through the crowd. Everyone was staring at her like, "Damn, girl, you look good." But then something unexpected happened. King Xerxes' eyes locked onto Queen Vashti, and he was not impressed. He was so not impressed that he sent a guard over to tell her to get her royal butt to his throne room ASAP. All the important peeps were watching, so there was no backing out now. And you know what Queen Vashti did? She played it cool, strolled over to the king, totally ignoring his angry vibes, and demanded that he and everyone else bow down to her. Talk about putting the queen in your face. King Ahasuerus was not having it. He was so mad that he yanked her royal crown off her head and kicked her out of the party. Not just any party, mind you, but the biggest party of the year. Talk about a major buzzkill. So there Queen Vashti was, all dressed up with nowhere to go. And King Ahasuerus was like, "Screw it, I need a new queen." And that's where Esther swoops in to save the day. Being a good Jew, she abided by the law, kept her heritage and faith under wraps. No one in the kingdom knew she was Jewish, not even the king who was her cousin, by the way. So here's the deal. King Ahasuerus is throwing this massive party, and everyone's invited except for the Jewish people. Why, you ask? Well, Haman, the king's evil advisor, had a bone to pick with the Jews and convinced the king to wipe them out. But here's the twist. While all this was going down, Esther's cousin, Mordecai, had overheard a plot to kill the king. So he spilled the beans to Esther, who then went and spilled the beans to her husband, the king. Now, picture this. The king is sitting on his fancy throne, sipping his wine, and he's like, "Hey, what should I do with this Vashti woman? She's kicked out of the party and doesn't seem too keen on coming back." Then along comes Esther, looking like $1 million and totally unaware of the drama unfolding around her. The king, being the total simp that he is immediately smitten with her and makes her the new queen. Little did they know that God had a divine plan in motion, placing Esther right where she needed to be to save the Jewish people from Haman's evil scheme. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the twists and turns of this thrilling tale. Do you feel like you're in the right place at the right time? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your stories of divine providence, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. Your support means everything to us and helps us keep these stories alive. Today, we're going to read from the book of Esther, chapter 2, verses 14 to 18, where it says that the king made Esther queen. And now it came about in the evening that the king was greatly distressed, and he ordered that all the women of the palace be brought before him. But when he saw Esther, the daughter of the Jews, standing among the women, the king was pleased with her. And he gave the diadem that was on his head to her, saying, "You and the women with you are to be the queen." And so he had the seat moved for her, and she sat at his right hand on a throne of gold, and a golden scepter of precious stones was placed in her hand. And the king gave her whatever she asked for, but with lavish generosity. And when all the women of the palace were brought in with her, Hattie, the king's wife, could not be distinguished from the other women in her beauty. For Esther had not told anyone about her people or her kindred, nor did she say anything about her own history because she was brought up in the palace of the king. In this passage, we see how Esther, a very humble young Jewish woman who didn't really have any power or prominence, became queen of the vast and expansive Persian Empire. Now, this was not by chance or luck. No, this was totally by the plan of God. You see, God had placed it on her heart to seek favor from the king, and although Esther didn't know the outcome, she trusted that God would be with her. So she went into the presence of the king without an invitation, and even though she risked her life, she knew that God would help her. And God did help her. He caused the king to fall in love with her. Not just any king, but King Xerxes, the king of kings, the ruler over many nations. Now, some might look at Esther and think, well, she was beautiful, so of course the king was going to pick her. But the Bible tells us that there were many beautiful women in the king's palace, and if beauty was the only thing that the king was looking for, he would have chosen one of them. But instead, he chose Esther. So what made Esther stand out? What caused the king to choose her and make her queen? Well, I believe it was three things. First, it was Esther's humility. You see, Esther didn't come into the king's presence with pride or arrogance. She humbly submitted herself to the king's will. Second, it was Esther's faith. Although Esther didn't explicitly state that she was Jewish, her faith in God was evident in the way that she conducted herself. And the Bible tells us that God had placed it on her heart to do this thing. And third, it was Esther's grace. You see, Esther didn't use her newfound position for selfish gain, but rather she used it to help her people. When Mordecai told Esther that the Jews were being persecuted, she didn't sit idly by. She took action, and it was this grace that set her apart from the other women in the king's palace. Now, when the king made Esther queen, he placed the royal crown on her head, and the Bible says that she was radiant and beautiful beyond compare, and the king's heart was completely taken by her beauty. Now, I want you to notice something here. The king didn't force Esther to do anything. He didn't force her to be his queen. He didn't force her to submit to his advances. No, Esther willingly became queen, and even after she became queen, she didn't hold it against the king that he had chosen her. Instead, she honored the king. She honored his position, and she honored the office that God had placed her in. And this is why the Bible tells us that she gained favor in the sight of the king. Friends, may we learn from Esther to always remain humble, to always have faith in God, and to always conduct ourselves with grace. For who knows, maybe God has a plan to use us in ways that we never imagined. Maybe God will take us from obscurity and cause us to shine brightly like a light in the midst of darkness. To God be the glory. Great is our God, and greatly to be praised, and His majesty is forever. Oh, come, let us worship. Let us bow down and take refuge in the Lord. I pray that you found this video to be an encouragement. If you did, please feel free to share it with your friends and family. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel where we teach people's God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who makes all things new. And we want to invite you to subscribe so you can be reminded when new videos come out. Now, if you are a student of the Bible, you know that there are some pretty evil people in the Bible, like Nimrod, Pharaoh, Saul, Jezebel, and Judas Iscariot. But today, we want to focus on another evil person, a man named Haman. Now, Haman is an interesting character because he's only in the book of Esther. So many Christians don't know about him or his evil plot against God's people. But before we get into that, let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Anonymous. I am one of the teachers here. I've been studying the Bible for over 20 years, and I've been teaching it for almost 10. It is my heart and my passion to see people discover the truth of God's Word and to help them apply it to their lives. We would love to have you join us every week for our Bible study. All right, let's dive into the story of Haman and his evil plot against the Jews. So Haman was an Agagite, which means he was a descendant of Agag. And the Bible tells us that Agag was the king of the Amalekites. If you remember, the Amalekites were the people that attacked Israel while they were in the wilderness, and they killed many of them. And God told Moses to completely destroy the Amalekites and not show them any mercy. But Agag, the king of the Amalekites, was spared. And what we see in the book of Esther is that many of his descendants, including Haman, still hate the Jews. And Haman's hatred is so strong that he wants to destroy every single Jew in the kingdom of Artaxerxes. But why does he hate the Jews so much? Well, the text says that he's angry because Mordecai, who's a Jew, won't bow down to him. But I think there's more to the story than just that. You see, the Jews were God's people. They were his chosen nation, and this set them apart from everyone else in the empire. And this would have made Haman very uncomfortable because he couldn't explain it. He couldn't understand why God would choose these people. In fact, he was probably angry at God. And his anger toward God caused him to be angry toward God's people. And his evil plot is laid out in chapter 3. The first part of the chapter says that King Artaxerxes held a great banquet for all of his nobles, and he showed them the riches of his kingdom and the glory of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And on the last day, the king was so pleased that he ordered Haman to throw a banquet for all the nobles of the kingdom. Again, the purpose was to show the riches and the glory of the king. And again, the party lasted for 180 days. Now, there's a lot of symbolism with the number 180. In the Bible, 180 days is exactly half a year, and it's symbolic of the half that humanity was under the power of darkness before Jesus came to save us. But we're going to see in the next few verses that God is still in control. Because after Haman threw his great feast, he said to King Artaxerxes, "There is a group of people who are separated from the other people in your kingdom, and they do not obey your laws. Therefore, it would be fitting for you, your majesty, to annihilate them so that we may utterly destroy them." And the king takes Haman's advice and issues a decree that the Jews should be destroyed on the 13th day of the 12th month. Now, after Haman had done this, he goes home, and his wife and friends are happy about the destruction that will come to the Jews. But Mordecai is upset. He tears his clothes and puts on sackcloth and ashes and goes and sits in the court. And Esther's servants tell her what has happened, and she tells them to go and find out what Mordecai is doing. In the next episode, we're going to see how God delivers the Jews through Esther and Mordecai. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And while you're waiting, check out this other episode where we talk about how God will never forget his covenant people. I want to thank you for watching this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned something. If you did, please leave me a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed, please join us by clicking the subscribe button below. Until next time, walk good. Have you ever been faced with a decision so big it seemed impossible to choose? Well, today we're going to look at someone who was faced with one of the biggest decisions anyone could ever face, and the consequences were life or death. But before we dive in, I just want to encourage you to subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Action Bible. Today's story takes place in the book of Esther. Now, if you haven't read this book before, it takes place in the ancient Persian Empire, and the main character, Esther, is a young Jewish woman who finds herself at the center of an evil plot that could wipe out her entire people. Now, Esther is living in the palace as the queen, but she has a secret. She's hiding the fact that she's Jewish. But when the king's evil advisor, Haman, finds out, he convinces the king to issue a decree that will order all the Jews in the empire to be wiped out. And guess who's next in line to be executed? Yep, you guessed it, Esther's people. So now, more than ever, it's important for Esther to keep her identity a secret. But when her cousin Mordecai hears about this evil plot, he sends her a message. It says, "Tell how Mordecai urged Esther to act, reminding her that she had come to her royal position for such a time as this." Esther 4:14. Wow! Just think about the courage it must have taken for Mordecai to send this message. He's basically telling the queen, hey, you gotta take action. You gotta use your power to help your people. But why would he tell her this? Why not keep a low profile and stay safe in the palace? Well, because Mordecai knew that Esther was placed in the palace for a reason. He knew that God had a plan for her, and it was her responsibility to carry it out. You see, God doesn't call us to live powerless lives. He calls us to be people of action. Sure, sometimes that means taking small steps like praying for our enemies or being kind to a stranger. But other times it means taking huge leaps of faith, like what Esther was about to do. So, what exactly did Esther do? Well, she decided to confront the king, even though it meant breaking the law and putting her own life on the line. She threw a huge banquet and invited the king and his top advisors. And at just the right moment, she revealed her Jewish identity and told the king what Haman had done. Now, to make a very long story short, God turned things around for Esther and her people. Haman was executed and the Jews were saved from destruction. And it was all because Esther didn't just sit back and wait for things to happen. She took action. So my question for you today is, what action will you take? Will you stand up for what's right, even when it's scary? Will you speak out against injustice, even when it seems like you're alone? Or will you just sit back and let things happen? Look, I know it's scary to take action, especially when the odds are stacked against you. But remember, God doesn't call us to be people who just feel good about themselves. He calls us to be doers of His Word. And the truth is, when we take action and put our faith into practice, good things happen. Bad things happen when we sit back and do nothing. So my friend, don't just sit there. Take action. Put your faith into practice. And remember, no matter what you do, you're not alone. God is with you every step of the way. So I'll ask again, what action will you take? Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Action Bible. If you did, be sure to give us a like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And hey, if you want to take action and help us reach more people with the gospel, you can do that by giving us a review on the platform. So go ahead and click that link right there and let us know what you think. Today's verse, Esther chapter 4, verse 11. And who knows whether you have come into the king's court for such a time as this? In the book of Esther, we see a young Jewish woman named Esther who is living in the palace of the king of the Persian Empire. Now she was there because she had been chosen as the most beautiful girl in the kingdom and taken from her home to be the bride of the king. But she had one big problem. Her people, the Jews, were in grave danger. The king had become enamored with another woman, Queen Vashti, and he wanted her to come to a party and show off her beauty for his enjoyment and the enjoyment of his friends. But when Vashti refused, the king became very angry, and he decided that he would get rid of her and find a new queen. That's how Esther ended up in the palace, taking her cousin, Mordecai's advice to enter the king's court and become the new queen. But now there was a plot against the Jews in the kingdom, and their lives were about to become very difficult. Mordecai begs Esther to go and plead with the king on behalf of her people, but she refuses. And in chapter 4, verse 11, Mordecai says to her, "And who knows whether you have come into the king's court for such a time as this?" This is an incredible statement, and it should cause us to pause and consider our current situation and the opportunities and the challenges that are before us. We can be certain that God has brought us where we are today for such a time as this. Look at Joseph in the book of Genesis. He was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, but he ended up saving the life of not only his family, but the entire nation of Egypt during a time of famine. David was anointed as king when he was just a young boy, but he had to wait until the king before him died for him to take the throne. Joseph and David both had to wait for their time to come. And the same is true for Esther. She couldn't save her people until she became queen. And if she was going to do anything, she had to take action right now. We don't know what opportunities lie ahead of us, but we can be certain that God has placed us in our current circumstances for such a time as this. We may have unique abilities, skills, resources, knowledge, or even just the ability to show up and be present. There are people around us that need our help, and they need us to be brave and courageous like Esther. We know that when Esther decided to approach the king, she knew that she could be putting her life on the line. But instead of being motivated by fear, she was motivated by faith. Faith in what? Well, verse 14 tells us, "For if I perish, I perish." In other words, if I do this and something bad happens to me, then I will die. But this is a great statement because she puts everything on the line and says, if I die anyway. Why? Because she trusts that God has brought her into the king's court for such a time as this. So many times we want to play it safe and we choose fear instead of faith. But what would happen if we all did that? What if everyone chose fear over faith? Evil would triumph and good would be destroyed. But thank God that's not the case. Thank God that there are people who step up to the plate when no one else can and who take the initiative to do what needs to be done because they trust in God. Are you faced with a situation in your life where you must choose between fear and faith? Remember, faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is acting despite the fear. So I challenge you to do just that. Be brave, be courageous, trust in God, and take the necessary steps to do what you know you should do. Your life may depend on it, and so may the lives of those around you. God bless you. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to know more about God's plan for your life, visit our website or simply follow the link in the description below. You know, I think that one of the reasons why the story of Esther is so popular in the month of Adar, in the month of March, is because it's a story that involves a banquet. And let's face it, who doesn't like a good banquet? We all like parties. We all like to celebrate. There's something about a celebration that just uplifts our spirits. But there's more to this banquet that meets the eye. In today's Torah portion, which is called Shushan Purim, we read how Esther, the Jewish queen, hosts a banquet for King Artaxerxes and Haman, the evil advisor who's looking to wipe out the Jews. Now, Esther didn't know what was going to happen at this banquet, but she knew that she had to invite Haman. Why did she have to invite him? Because Haman was the king's close friend. He was invited to every royal banquet, and if someone didn't invite Haman to their party, they would risk offending the king. So, even though Esther was afraid, because she knew that inviting Haman was tantamount to signing her own death warrant, she still invited him because she knew that she had to do it. She couldn't afford to offend the king. We learn from Rashi, the great medieval commentator, that when Esther invited Haman, he was so pleased that he went home and called all his friends and family and told them, "Hey, guess what? I've been invited to the queen's house. I'm going to go and I'll bring all my friends." So when the time came for the banquet, not only did Haman show up, but he brought an entire entourage with him. Now the first banquet lasted 7 days, and on the 12th day, after everyone had left, then Esther revealed herself as a Jew to the king, and she exposed Haman's wicked plot. But why did she wait so long? Why didn't she just come right out and tell the king? Well, we can learn a few lessons from Esther's actions. Firstly, she realized that she needed to build a relationship with the king before she could reveal her identity to him. You see, when Esther was taken into the palace, she had no idea what to do. She didn't know the customs, she didn't know the rules, and so she took a year to learn everything there was to learn about being a queen. And then, after a year, she still wasn't ready. You see, a queen had to be very careful with what she said and did, and Esther was afraid that if she wasn't careful, she might offend someone important. So she took another year to make sure that she understood everything before she did anything. Secondly, Esther knew that she had to gain the trust of the king before she could ask him for help. You see, when Esther finally decided to reveal her identity to the king, she didn't just come right out and tell him everything. No, she played her cards close to her chest, and she slowly revealed her identity to him over the course of several days. She knew that if she didn't do it gradually, the king might not have believed her. And thirdly, Esther knew that she had to be prepared for whatever happened. You see, when Esther revealed her identity to the king, she knew that she might be putting herself in danger, but she was willing to take that risk because she knew that it was the right thing to do. She was prepared to sacrifice everything she had gained in the palace because she knew that it was worth it. Friends, the story of Esther teaches us that sometimes we have to take risks in life in order to do what is right. It's easy to play it safe, to keep our heads down and our eyes on the prize. But sometimes we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zone and take a stand for what we believe in, even if it means putting ourselves in danger. May we all be inspired. Do you know what it means to be truly free? Because sometimes we can feel like we're living in bondage. There are things that are holding us back from getting to that promised land. And so today, I want to share with you 4 points that will help you to understand what it means to be truly free. And this is based off of a story in the book of Esther. Number 1, deliverance from your enemies. In Esther chapter 2, verse 19, it says that Haman was the son of Ham, and he had become very powerful, had become very great in power in the king's sight. This man hated the Jews, plotted against them, wanted to destroy them. He wanted to annihilate them, wipe them out. But look at what happens in chapter 7, verse 6. Then they brought Haman to the king in the royal court. And when he had bowed down to King Artaxerxes, the king said, "Uncover his head." So they uncovered his head, and behold, there was a mark on the neck of the gallows which Mordecai had prepared for him. And the king burned with wrath. You see, Haman thought he could get away with what he was doing. He thought he was going to get away with trying to destroy the Jewish people, but he was caught. The plot was uncovered and he was executed right there in front of the king. So if you have an enemy, if there's somebody that's after you, plotting against you, trying to destroy you, God will deliver you from that person. God will expose their wicked plots, and then you can live a life of peace, knowing that God has delivered you from your enemy. Number 2, deliverance from death. In Esther chapter 9, verse 24, it says, "And the Jews had a complete victory over their enemies. For Haman had prepared for them a great furnace to burn them and to destroy them. But he himself had fallen into the midst of the burning fiery things, that same fire that he tried to use to burn the Jewish people. It was used to burn him." See, the Jews were innocent. They didn't deserve to die. But Haman had this decree. He wanted to wipe them out. He had this great furnace, a pyre, a bonfire ready. But the people who were supposed to be burned, God turned it around. And the very thing that was set up to take the lives of the Jews ended up taking the life of Haman. You know, sometimes Satan tries to do the same thing to you. He'll set up death. He'll set up things to harm you. But if you trust in God, God will turn it around. And what was set up to destroy you will end up destroying your enemies. And you will live to declare the works of the Lord, to tell the world about the goodness of God, because God will turn things around. Number 3, deliverance by the word of the Lord. Verse 25 reads, "So these were written in the book of the kings of the Medes and Persians and in the chroniclers of the Jews." You know, Esther never wrote her story down until she was much older. She became queen. She had deliverance and victory. But she didn't write it down until much later. But I believe she wrote this story down so that future generations, so that the Jewish people would know what God had done, that the true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, He is the only one who can deliver. Because when you read through this story, it wasn't Esther that did it all. It wasn't even Mordecai that did it all. It was God. It was God who put it in the heart of the king to remember Mordecai. It was God who put it in Esther's heart to become queen. It was God who put it in Haman's heart to devise a plan. Do you ever feel like your story isn't going anywhere? Like the plot has stalled and you're just stuck in neutral? If so, I want you to think of the biblical heroine Esther. In case you don't remember your Bible study from Sunday school, real quick recap. Esther was an ordinary young Jewish woman living in the extraordinary setting of ancient Persia. When her people were in grave danger, she risked everything to save them. And in the process, she discovered that she had a unique destiny set before her. As we close this series on her life, let's think about 3 big lessons we can learn from Esther's story. First, God's providence is always at work. Listen to this. In chapter 4, verse 14, it says, "For if you kept silent at this time, relief and deliverance would come to the Jews from another source, but you and your relatives with you would perish. Who knows whether you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" In this passage, Mordecai tells Esther that God has placed her in the palace for such a time as this. Now, listen carefully. This does not mean that God orchestrated every detail of Esther's life in order to get her to the palace. She made decisions along the way that led her there. But what God did do was that he caused King Cyrus to forget that he had previously banished all the Jews in his empire. He allowed Esther to be raised in the palace as an orphan without any knowledge of her Jewish heritage. He gave her favor in the eyes of the king and made her the queen. And he put it on her heart to seek the welfare of her people. Bottom line, God was working behind the scenes to get Esther in position so that when the time came, she could act to save her people. This encourages me, because no matter where I am right now, I can rest assured that God is working behind the scenes to get me in position for whatever it is that he wants me to do. Second, courage often requires risk. Do you remember how Esther's story started? Well, if not, let me remind you. Her cousin Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, and so he sent word to Esther, who was the king's wife, asking her to go to the king and reveal the plot. The problem was, though, that approaching the king unannounced was punishable by death. But in spite of the great risk involved, Mordecai urged Esther to go to the king and tell him what she knew. And look at her response in chapter 4, verse 16. "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast with me for 3 days. We will neither eat nor drink anything during that time, and we will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and we will risk our lives. If we are to be killed, we and our people will die, but if we keep silent, we and our people will live." Here's the beautiful thing. Although Esther didn't know it at the time, God was with her every step of the way, and he gave her everything she needed to succeed in her mission. You see, the night before Esther went to the king, God had already dealt with Haman, the evil villain in the story, and made sure that he was hanged on the very gallows he had built to hang Mordecai. So, although Esther's courage was required in order to approach the king, once she got there, God had already taken care of everything. This teaches us that sometimes God calls us to take risks, but he never calls us to take foolish chances. God will give us everything we need in order to succeed in the task he's called us to do. Third, obedience can save many lives. Look back at chapter 4, verses 13 to 14. Again, it says, "We would be killed, we and our children. But if we remain silent, we and our children will live. For who knows whether you have come to royalty for just such a time as this?" Simply put, if Esther didn't obey God and go to the king, not only would she have lost her life, but so would everyone else who shared her faith. But because she trusted God, took the necessary risks and approached the king, God was able to save her people and establish them as a nation in the land of Persia. Friends, we must never underestimate the power of one person obeying God. Because it wasn't just Esther who would have died if she didn't act. It was every single Jew in the empire. That's why it's so important that we obey